Well, I think the big challenge that we have, certainly from an international perspective, is dealing with some very clever criminals. Very clever criminals, people who will try to hide their assets by burying them in jurisdictions with weak AML controls. They will then bury them even further by putting them into trusts and complex investment vehicles that are very difficult to untangle. The challenge behind those for a business is, how do you really identify who the true owners or beneficial owners are? Because they use, in turn, very clever professionals to help them to achieve that. People who, it has to be said, could even be working on the fringes of law. But again, this happens around the world, and we will always be challenged with that kind of scenario. Back at home, we have a similar situation, but here in the UK, that is, but perhaps slightly easier to deal in your own jurisdiction, because you're very familiar with firms and businesses and companies that are associated with them. Sitting alongside all of that, though, you've got the very big issue of international sanctions, and that takes up a lot of time now, and certainly a lot of our time, ensuring that we meet all international sanction rules and regulations, and that our customers are very well known to us. Well, beyond any doubt, sanctions have played a major part in our work, particularly over this last 2 to 3 years. In real terms, what that means is that, again, our systems have to be very robust for customer and payment screening. They have to be absolutely spot on. And we cannot sit back and say that because our systems, well, we bought a brand new system from X and Y company, it's good to go, we're fine. You're never fine. You can never be complacent in this business. You've constantly got to be reviewing rules and settings to make sure that they meet the needs that exist out there, because they're changing all the time. The criminal fraternity and others, and I'll talk about those in a moment, are constantly trying to find ways around the system. Within sanctions orders, you've got a whole variety of names of people who you cannot do business with. Now that includes, and very much at the top of the list in my view, terrorists. This list is known as the consolidated list, and it's a considerable length. So, supposing we've got a system that actually does screen customer and payments, let's say customers particularly, so what? So, at the end of the day, the system produces alerts or false positives, let's call them that. In other words, we're not saying it's lots of terrorists we've got in our books. Hopefully we haven't got any at all. But we've got hits because the name sounds similar to that which is on that list, and our software must be able to do that. There's still got to be manual intervention. There's still got to be somebody that's sitting there with that name and with access to all source information that it can investigate those names and say, well, is it a false positive? Is it a potential match? Or is it a real match? Now, if it's a real match, which I have to say is extremely rare, then fine, it will be investigated. But whether it's a real match or not, we have to be able to rule those out. So every institution now, and certainly every major institution that's worth its salt, has to be sure that it has very, very powerful screening tools, because we all know what the outcome of terrorist activity is. Very much to the fore with the FSA at the moment. The FSA, as you know, are going through a period of transition, and by the end of 2012 there will be split into two new bodies. In the interim, if anybody thinks, oh well, they've taken their eye off the ball, they definitely haven't in this space. Because Bob Ferguson, who's head of financial crime and intelligence currently for the FSA, has made it quite clear that they're entering into a rigorous program specifically looking at AML. And to endorse that, they have. We're also now aware that will resolve in reviews being conducted on particularly private banking areas, which also we cover. And PEPs, politically exposed persons, and that is high impact firms is who they're looking at, and that is actually in play right at the moment. So if anybody ever thought that changes in the FSA meant, you know, a lightening of approach, it's absolutely not the case. Sitting alongside of that, of course, we've got the single biggest piece of legislation that's come out for quite some while. On the 1st of July, in the United Kingdom, there is a new anti-bribery and corruption laws. They will come into place on that date, delayed slightly from the original date, but that's a big challenge for many firms. Firms know what bribery and corruption means, but how do they actually put it into place in respect to their own business and the people they do business with? So we have got probably some of the most powerful laws in the world will come into play from that date. And firms need to be ahead of the game. They need to be engaged with this, well, actually a long time back, really. This is an ongoing challenge, is how do you remain fresh and vibrant? And I think the training has to be relevant, interesting and progressive. So by that what I mean is it's no good just presenting training to people as a one-off approach, right, well you've done that now so you passed, you're good to go. It has to be something which keeps people's mind engaged and also makes sure that they're maintaining what are the current threats out there, because what were the threats perhaps 1, 2 or certainly 3 years ago is not the same now. The international arena in particular has changed and is much, much more challenging. But even here in the UK it's the same. So training needs to help an individual to come from, if you wish, perhaps standpoint A, and taking them right through to B, C and D, wherever it is that either they need to be to complete that job or to help their own personal development needs. Because very often on this subject, people do get very interested in it. It begins to grow on them and they say, well, that's something I'd like to know more about. And we need to make sure that we support those people and give them the information that they need to help that learning. We had a particular need in a fairly recently harmonised firm of considerable size to produce training which would be rolled out across all employees, wherever they might be. Some actually are in the UK, many and most are outside of the UK. It had to reflect diverse needs. So in other words, we have a suite of 4 different courses which takes us through from basic, intermediate, advanced and technical. That gives, just as I was saying earlier, gives the opportunity to be able to take people through from just perhaps a back office role where they just needed basic training through their development period, not all at once of course, but over a period of time to a much higher level. It also needed to be extremely importantly in multiple languages, because we can't take a very local view and say, well, English is good for us, therefore English is good to go everywhere. Many of our colleagues can speak English, but we needed to adapt it for that. It also needed to be modern, fresh and interactive and flexible, having the ability to be able to change and amend when we need it to. And so we have to have a special working relationship to actually achieve that kind of ends and have people who are prepared to adapt and change with us. We have 2 parts of our 4 courses just about to launch on our own learning platform. We have conducted all of our basic testing on its usability in terms of how it works with our platform, and that's all good to go. And we're looking forward to launching it and getting it out there, and then again improving and developing it as we need to as we go along.